Hello, we're looking at problem number 1 from section 4-8. It says simplify a number using I. So how do you write the square root of negative 18 by using the imaginary unit I? So let's write that here. The square root of negative 18. I'm sure you probably already know that you can't take the square root of a negative number. You get an imaginary number. So let's pull out that negative. So let's say the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 18. Well, the square root of negative 1, we know, is imaginary, so we'll say that's I. So now I can take the square root of 18 like I normally would. So the square root of 18, so first of all we have I times the square root of 18. And when I take that square root of 18, I can break that down to 9 times 2. And I see automatically 9 times 2 is 18, and I can take the square root of 9, which is 3. So I get 3I times the square root of 2. Now let's look at the got it problem. So let's do the square root of negative 12. So the square root of negative 12. Again, I'm going to take out that, that negative 1. So the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 12. And I'm going to break down that square root of 12. So I get I times the square root of 12. And so I times the square root of 4 times 3 equals 12. I can take the square root of 4, it's 2, so I get 2I, and I'll leave that square root of 3 under there. Alright, let's look at part B, the square root of negative 25. So I have square root of negative 25. Again, I'm going to pull out the negative 1. And I know the square root of negative 1 is just imaginary, it's I, and the square root of 25 is 5. I don't want to write it like that, so I have 5I. And let's look at part C, square root of negative 7. Again, I pull out the negative 1. Square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 7 is just 7, so I'll leave it like that. And finally, reason, explain why the square root of negative 64 is not equal to negative square root of 64. Alright, so we have the square root of negative 64, and we want to see why it's not equal to the square root of negative 64. Well, the square root of 64 we all know is 8, so we get 8I. And then for when I have a negative 64, I can pull it out, so I have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 64, so it gives me I, 8, or 8I. Oops, I'm sorry, I made a mistake down here. Wish there was somebody in here to correct me when I make mistakes. I get negative 8. So I know that negative 8 is not equal to 8I. So there's one part of my reasoning. And I also know that 8I is an imaginary number and negative 8 is an actual real number. So I hope this helps.